London in the late 1960s and early 70s was a city of two very different faces. On one side, you had the swinging 60s, the glitz, the music, the fashion, and the Carnaby Street Revolution. But on the other side, in the dark, rain-slicked corners of the East End and the smoky basements of West End gambling dens, there was a power struggle unfolding that the history books rarely mention. And right in the center of that storm stood a man who was less of a human being and more of a force of nature. I'm talking about Lenny McLean. Now, you might have seen my previous videos about the governor, but today we're going much deeper. We're opening the vault on a story that sounds like it came straight out of a Hollywood movie, but I assure you, it's as real as the cobblestones on a London street. This is the full, uncut story of why the most powerful criminal organization in history, the American Mafia, decided that sending hitmen after Lenny McLean was a very, very bad business decision. Before we get into the heavy details, I want to ask you something. Have you ever felt like you were in a situation where the odds were completely stacked against you? Most people look for the nearest exit, but as we're about to see, Lenny McLean wasn't most people. He was a man who lived by a code of respect that was so rigid it almost felt medieval, and that's exactly where the friction with the Americans started. To understand why this conflict happened, you have to understand the global landscape of organized crime back then. The American Mafia, specifically the Five Families of New York, was at the absolute height of its international reach. They had their hands in everything from Las Vegas to Havana, and they were looking at London as a fresh, untapped market. They wanted to bring their sophisticated casino interests and protection rackets to the UK. But London already had its own kings. The Cray twins were the famous faces of the underworld, the celebrities of crime. But Lenny was the enforcer that even the kings didn't want to upset. He was the man who kept the peace, or more accurately, the man who decided when the peace was over. Now, imagine a smoke-filled club in the West End. You've got these high-level associates from across the Atlantic. These are guys who are used to people trembling just at the mention of their family name. They enter Lenny's territory thinking that a fancy silk suit, a pinky ring, and a heavy Brooklyn accent would grant them total immunity. They thought the London boys were just amateurs. But Lenny didn't care about your family tree or how many people you had on your payroll in New York or New Jersey. To him, if you were disrespectful in his club or if you tried to muscle in on a business he was protecting, you weren't a made man. You were just another problem that needed to be handled.
I've often wondered, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on the comments on this. Do you think the Mafia truly underestimated the British firms, or did they just assume their global reputation would do the heavy lifting for them? Personally, I think it was a massive case of cultural ego. They weren't prepared for a man who didn't fear a bullet because he was too busy being a hurricane of a human being. They were playing a game of chess, but Lenny was playing a game of who's left standing. The tension began to boil over during a series of small, seemingly insignificant incidents. It started with taxing. The Americans wanted a cut of the gambling machines and the door takes. They tried to use their standard intimidation tactics, the quiet whispers in the ear, the veiled threats about accidents happening to business owners. But every time they tried to squeeze a club where Lenny was the head of security, they hit a brick wall. A 6'3", 280-pound brick wall made of pure muscle and scar tissue. There's a story, part of the Uncut history, about a specific night in a club called the Horseshoe. A group of men linked to a certain family in the States tried to demand a sitting fee from the manager. Lenny walked over, not saying a word, and simply stood there. One of the Americans, trying to be the tough guy, told Lenny to take a walk. Now, if you know anything about Lenny McLean, you know that telling him what to do was the fastest way to end up in a hospital bed. Lenny didn't argue, he didn't shout, he just smiled. And as many survivors of Lenny's wrath have said, when the governor smiled, that's when you should have started running. Lenny reportedly took the lead man by the lapels of his expensive suit and moved him toward the exit so fast the man's shoes barely touched the carpet. It wasn't just a physical ejection, it was a total loss of face. In the Mafia world, face is everything. You can't be a feared boss if a bouncer in London just threw you into the street like yesterday's trash. This led to the decision that would change everything. The bosses back in New York couldn't let this stand. It wasn't about the money anymore, it was about the precedent. If word got out that a single man in London could defy the commission, it would weaken their grip everywhere. So they did what they always did. They sent the cleaners. 4 men were chosen for the job. These weren't street thugs or low-level associates. These were professional hitmen, guys who had done work across the globe. They arrived in London with a clear objective: eliminate the man who was making their business expansion difficult. The hitmen tracked Lenny for days, studying his routine. But here's the thing about Lenny: he didn't have a hidden routine. He was always in the same places, usually right out in the open, because he never felt the need to hide. The hitmen finally found their opportunity in a confined space.
Some sources say it was a private back office of a club. Others say it was a small bar during the early morning hours. They thought they had the perfect setup: 4 professionals, all armed, against one man who they assumed was just a brawler. This is where the greatest tactical error in the history of the London underworld occurred. They thought that 4 against 1, especially with hardware involved, was a guaranteed win. But they didn't account for the governor factor. They didn't realize that Lenny McLean didn't view a gun as a death sentence. He viewed it as a challenge. When Lenny realized what was happening, he didn't try to negotiate. He didn't plead for his life. He didn't offer the money. Instead, he did something that reportedly terrified those men more than any weapon ever could. He walked to the door and he locked it. Think about the psychology of that for a second. If you're in a room with 4 people who want to hurt you, your instinct is to find the exit. Lenny's instinct was to make sure they couldn't get out. He trapped himself in a room with 4 professional hitmen. He turned the entire room into a cage, and he was the apex predator. What followed wasn't a fight. A fight implies that both sides have a chance. This was an erasure. By the time the noise stopped and the dust settled, those 4 men were in a state that left the responding doctors speechless. They hadn't just been beaten, they had been dismantled. And the most chilling part of the story? When the police eventually arrived, Lenny was reportedly sitting there, calm, perhaps adjusting his cufflinks, looking like he had just finished a routine day at the office. This event sent a massive shockwave across the Atlantic. The report that went back to New York wasn't "the hit failed." The report was much more terrifying for the bosses. It was "the target is not a man, he's a liability." In the world of organized crime, everything is a math equation. It's all about the bottom line. The Mafia bosses realized that to take out someone like Lenny McLean, they would have to start an all-out war on British soil. They would have to send a small army. And what would that achieve? It would bring the full weight of the Scotland Yard, the British media, and the government down on their heads. It would expose their money laundering, their legal businesses, and their political connections. They realized that Lenny wasn't just a man, he was a sovereign nation. To fight him was to invade a territory that offered no profit, only pain. The Mafia, for all their violence, are businessmen first, and the business of killing Lenny McLean was simply too expensive. But there's another layer to this, a more human layer. I think the real reason they stopped sending men wasn't just physical fear, though, let's be honest, after what happened to those 4 hitmen, fear was a huge factor. I think it was a begrudging, dark respect.
The Mafia is built on the myth of the tough guy, the honor man who stands his ground. In Lenny McLean, they saw the purest version of that myth. They saw a man who couldn't be bought, couldn't be intimidated, and wouldn't be broken. He was a relic of an older time, a man who fought for his respect with his bare hands in an age of silencers and shadows.
I often ask myself, and I'll ask you, do you think men like Lenny could exist in today's world, with all the surveillance, the technology, and the way the world has changed? Or was he a product of a specific time and place, a perfect storm of London grit and post-war toughness? Personally, I think he was a one-off. You don't get two Lenny McLeans in one century. As we close this file today, I want you to really sit with that image, a man locking the door against four hitmen. It's a testament to the power of the human will, and of course, a legendary set of fists. Lenny went on to become an author, an actor, and a legitimate businessman, but he always carried that aura of the governor. He proved that in a world of massive organizations and international syndicates, one man standing his ground can make the most feared group on earth blink first. If you enjoyed this deep dive into the gritty, uncut history of the firms and the men who ruled London, please make sure to subscribe to The Firm's Law. We have so many more files to open, from the secret lives of the Krays to the tactical brilliance of the Richardson gang. You won't want to miss what's coming next, because we're just getting started. What do you think was Lenny's greatest weapon? Was it his sheer physical strength, or was it the mental toughness to lock that door? Let's get a conversation going in the comments below. I try to read as many as I can, and I love hearing your takes on these historical figures. Until next time, keep your eyes open and your words solid. This is The Firm's Law, signing off.